Well, welcome to the webinar today. Today is all about Down syndrome cognition research, a dad's perspective. And we're so pleased that Lumind Research Down Syndrome Foundation is sponsoring today's webinar and bringing us our speaker, Mike Manor. He's a strategy professor at the University of Notre Dame. His research focuses on strategic leadership, corporate governance, and knowledge creation, with a particular emphasis on how the characteristics and experience of CEOs and top management teams can help and hurt organizations in their pursuit of sustainable, competitive advantage. I foresee us bringing him back for other webinars not related to research. His research has been published in the leading management journals, and he's been interviewed or quoted on NPR, CNN, Businessweek, the USA Today, and the LA Times, Yahoo, and a variety of other media outlets. He teaches primarily in Notre Dame's MBA program with classes on corporate strategy and business model innovation. But we're happy to have him here talking today as a parent, and so I'm going to turn it over to Mike Manor.
Thank you so much. Can everyone see my slides? I think we should be okay.
Good to go.
I'm very excited to be talking with you today and sharing my perspective. As we get into this, I want to highlight a few things. One is that is it working? Let's see. There we go. Sorry for that. A few kind of starting points to just make sure that everything is clear as we go through this. One is that I'm not a Down syndrome research scientist, so as I talk about these things, I'll talk about them in fairly general terms, but I've done my best to kind of give you a dad's take on this, to kind of, for somebody that's been around this for a few years and had the opportunity to see the grant process a few times and get to know some of the scientists. This is my best take on all of this. But if you want to dive deeper into different elements of the actual research, there are a lot of resources, webinars like this from the actual scientists. I'm sure some of you have actually been part of those in the past, as well as presentations at conferences and a lot of other opportunities. So going back to my original slide, I just want to give you a sense of what's on there. At the top are a couple of the private foundations that are focused on Down syndrome cognition research. They span across the world, and they all have a little bit different focus, but they all are united in their pursuit of trying to fund research that will help create new opportunities for people with Down syndrome. And at the bottom are pictures of some of the scientists. I think that ideas like cognition research become very impersonal when we just talk about research studies and clinical trials and specific targets. It's really nice if we can visualize who we're talking about here. So these are some of the actual scientists that are spending their life's work in pursuing these questions. And as Dina mentioned, please feel free to submit questions at any point along the way, and we'll stop periodically and I'll address your questions. And Dina, if people have pressing questions in the middle of it, please do break in and let me know if things are confusing. So the agenda for today is to start off with a historical view, and this isn't a deeply historical view, it's more just to get a perspective on how the understanding of Down syndrome has changed over time and what is particularly new about the last 10 or 15 years. And so we'll talk about a couple different versions of that, starting, as you all know, Down syndrome's been around forever, but the recognition of it by the medical community and the approach to that has changed quite a bit in the last few years. And so we'll talk first about that. And then, in particular, we'll focus on what changed. You know, what was it that happened in the last 15 years that really broke things open and transformed the way that people think about cognition research and has led to a huge number of publications in this space and new scientists rushing in, new money coming toward the problem, and we'll kind of go through, you know, what's all new about this, what's the big deal, and why weren't we doing this 20 years ago. From that point, we will then talk about some of the most promising directions right now, and because I'm not a scientist, I did my best to give you labels that would help to explain the general idea of what's going on with these research studies to be a little bit more accessible than the GABA A receptor on the, whatever. And so hopefully when we get to that point, I'll be able to give you a sense of the different approaches, the different targets, how people are thinking about this. Then we'll transition to focusing on what we're realistically working toward. What are realistic goals, what are not realistic goals, and how do we think about this so that we have kind of a clear sense of why this is important and why I personally am really excited about this stuff. And then I'll spend a little bit of time on my personal journey towards cognition research, in the sense that I didn't know anything about Down syndrome, and much less cognition research, until we had a prenatal diagnosis of Down syndrome in our second child. And so I'll kind of take you through the process through which I went from a completely uninformed kind of outsider into a big advocate and enthusiastic parent trying to cheerlead for this work. And then we'll wrap up with a little bit about how you could potentially get really involved with this in more passive ways or in more active ways, and all the things that we'll do to kind of make that easier for you if that's something that you're excited about. So with that, just a reminder, again, I'm not a research scientist, but I will do my best. So historical view of Down syndrome. There are 3 pictures here. One is one of the earliest representations of a person with Down syndrome in a painting from 1515. Then a picture of Dr. Jonathan Langdon Down, one of the key people, obviously, it's named after him. And then Jerome Lejeune. So to give you a sense of the historical view, this is certainly not comprehensive, but I'm just kind of hitting some of the big points. For medicine, the key starting point is to begin to describe a condition. So it may exist in a population, but once medicine begins to describe that condition, then we can start moving forward. And so in 1515 or thereabouts, there is a painting that's now at the Met in New York that depicted one, possibly 2 people with Down syndrome pretty clearly in a beautiful representation, one as an angel. Then in 1866, so fast forward about 300 years, we have the first medically identified focus on Down syndrome from Dr. Jonathan Langdon Down, where he started to describe the specific characteristics of Down syndrome. Then fast forward another 100 years or so, and we get to Jerome Lejeune, who began to get to the genetic cause. And so this is the time at which like the double helix was being discovered, and gene science and chromosomal science was at its infancy, but that began a process where we started to understand much more deeply what exactly is going on here. And forgive me if some of this is review for some of you. It's nice to kind of put this in perspective as I move forward into some of the exciting things that are happening now. But from that point forward, and potentially before that, the treatment of Down syndrome has been pretty good in treating things that mainstream medicine treats in the general population. So as cardiology has improved, our ability to help people with congenital heart defects like Sophie had has become pretty good. So Sophie's heart surgery had a 98% survival rate. Tubes in ears, eyeglasses, treatment for leukemia, some of the things that we see in people with Down syndrome have been addressed by mainstream medicine somewhat well, as mainstream medicine has not really focused on Down syndrome. They've more focused on these conditions, and people with Down syndrome benefited from that. But the idea of medically treating the cognitive symptoms of Down syndrome, which every person with Down syndrome has some level of cognitive impairment, is something that was never done before. And in the words of Dr. Craig Garner, leader of some research at Stanford and one of the pioneers in this field, he described it as a disorder for which there was no hope, no treatment, and this idea of why would you waste your time? This is a condition where, at best, medicine or science was focusing on single gene variants, where a single gene might be turned on or off or influencing some outcome, and this is an entire extra copy of a chromosome with hundreds of genes, and so it was viewed as potentially impossibly complex. Roger Reeves, another pioneer in this space, who maybe some of you have seen some of his webinars, he's a fantastic advocate for this. You know, he described it pretty clearly with it just seeming impossibly complex. And so this really wasn't an area for research to focus on. And so this is the starting point through which we start having some really important things happen that changed the scientific view and has led to a huge increase in research focus. So what changed? My colleague here at Notre Dame loves to use pictures to describe things, so here are a couple of pictures for you if you're a picture person. Mouse, brain science, map, and clinical trials. So first was the Down syndrome mouse. Dr. Reeves talked about a turning point being when Muriel Davison made her mouse. In other words, you could she was able to create a mouse that had many of the conditions or characteristics of people with Down syndrome, which allowed research to move forward, and a lot of the research has focused on mouse models with working on mice and not on people, which was a huge turning point to be able to advance our understanding more significantly. A second thing that changed was an evolving paradigm in the way that neuroscience looked at the brain. The view in the past had been that the brain was relatively fixed, and brain injuries were very difficult to teach or to correct, and problems with different functions in the brain were very difficult to understand or to address. But this evolving idea of neuroplasticity, that actually the brain is a lot more fluid and capable of being addressed or being altered in ways that can help people to address different conditions, has taken over. A third thing was the Human Genome Project, which although officially finished in 2001, really a lot of it has happened in the 10-15 years after that. But this provided a map of what genes are on which chromosomes and which genes are associated with which phenotypes or kind of outcomes or behavioral conditions. And so now all of a sudden there was a clear and increasingly clear map of this extra chromosome and what that could mean for people with Down syndrome. And then a fourth thing that's much more recent, or a bit more recent, is the launch of a big pharmaceutical clinical trial. So Roche, I know that some of you probably were involved in this, but this was an exciting thing that a big pharmaceutical biotech kind of company looked at the Down syndrome population and saw promise in addressing a particular approach, and then they started doing a lot of the hard lifting to lay the groundwork for their clinical trial and then future clinical trials. And so these things, particularly the first three, but also the fourth, changed perceptions in science really dramatically. Dr. Mobley, another pioneer in this space, talked about a sea change in our ability to understand and treat Down syndrome. Just an explosion of information. And if you go out there and Google this, which I'm sure some of you have, it's amazing. I'll highlight some of the most promising things, or some of the things that Lumind is focused on. But really, to go from almost no publications in this space to a wide range of targets, different paths, different ways of thinking about helping to improve cognition from many different labs, many different specialties. It was just an explosion that has helped to create hope and really change people's perspective. So before I move on, are there any questions that have come up at this point, or should I keep going?
No questions at the moment.
Okay. Well, if people, don't be shy. Again, I will do my best to address any questions as they come up. And this is not the authoritative guide to Down syndrome research. It's more just a way of thinking about the history and the development and how this has changed to really launch what's happened in the last few years. So then in 2006, 2007, one review article in a scientific journal described a year of unprecedented progress. In some materials, you saw this described as a miracle year, where 3 different labs using 3 really different approaches to addressing cognition in people with Down syndrome found startlingly impressive findings or compelling results. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about the specifics of some of these in a few minutes, but the basic idea is you're talking Stanford, University of California, Johns Hopkins, leading thinkers who, in working pretty independently, found some really compelling things. And what happens when you see these exciting results? Research success breeds more great research. And so where you have some things getting started, suddenly you have a few more universities, and this is not a comprehensive list, and then all of a sudden you get for-profit pharmaceutical companies and a lot of researchers that were otherwise uninterested in Down syndrome start crowding into the space, and that's a beautiful thing that has happened over the last 10 years especially. And so this is, again, just a subset of the research labs and pharmaceutical companies and biotechs that are focusing on this, but this shows why people are so excited. This independent, the idea that independent experts have looked at these findings and thought, wow, I think that there's something really going on there, and have pushed forward with different perspectives is an exciting development. And so I have a slide here that kind of helps to give you a few milestones of where we're at, and we'll go in a little bit more detail in a few minutes, but 9, 3, 4, 1. So 9 potential drug targets have been identified. These are the compounds that have potential, have shown promise, preclinical, development, but really are kind of showing progress or promise. 3 candidate drugs. These are the ones that have shown so much promise that we're now moving toward clinical trial stage, where we're talking about dosage and effectiveness and safety assessments. And to be able to go from there was nothing in this space to 9 potential targets, 3 candidate drugs. There have been 4 clinical trials, the establishment of a testing network and clinical site network across the country. Different companies getting involved with this. This isn't just Roche's baby. We're talking about AC Immune, Transition Therapeutics, Elan, a couple others that, and some others that haven't yet made investments but are really looking at this, and it shows the kind of progress. One important thing that happened along here is University of Arizona. Some folks, some of you might have seen a fantastic webinar about this in the past. Developed the cognitive test battery, which allows scientists to more effectively test different types of cognition in people with Down syndrome. When you start trying to look at how effective are some compounds at helping with learning or helping with memory, traditional tests or self-assessments that have been used in prior research don't work as well with the Down syndrome population, not because people with Down syndrome aren't capable, but just the way that people interact with these assessments can sometimes be quite different. And so Arizona has done some exceptional research to help to create that, and that has been used in some of the trials, and it has shown promise in being an effective discriminator to be able to assess progress. And then more recently, there's been a better understanding of the link to Alzheimer's disease, and this has become one of the hottest areas of Down syndrome research, with a lot of excitement, both from work that had been done on Alzheimer's that's progressing in a really exciting way, and then the idea that addressing this in the Down syndrome population could give us some real opportunities, both for Down syndrome folks to help with the broader community and vice versa. And so that takes us to this idea that, Roger Reeves says very eloquently, I never thought we'd be in a position to say we're going to take therapies forward to directly treat Down syndrome, but that is the case. We're in the early stages of a revolution in understanding the basis of many of these features. And so this is, again, a leading thinker that is out there helping to change minds of scientists and demonstrate through his own work and championing of others' work what might be possible. And for people like me, stated a little differently, I prefer it in more of these terms. Keep calm, it's only an extra chromosome. Some great t-shirts were printed with this kind of idea, but it's the same basic idea. This is not an impossibly complex problem that science should avoid because we really can't do a lot to help, but rather it's just an extra chromosome, and we have some exciting new ways to think about how to regulate that or how to map the effects of the chromosome and different genes associated with the chromosome, and this is really possible. So with that, again, I'll open for any questions if there are any questions that have come up. Dina, anything going on?
Not yet, so you can keep going. Just
Okay.
remember to type those if you have a question along the way.
Okay, and it's perfectly okay if questions don't come up. We can do questions at the end, but I certainly want to address any questions that you have as we go along. And I know that some of this information is surely new for some folks, and some of it, you've seen this a few times in different lenses, and that's perfectly okay. Hopefully this is a helpful way of thinking about the progression of this research to give you a little bit of perspective. So next I want to talk about some of the most promising directions, and I'll get to a slide that shows you some of these kind of neurons and neurotransmission and cerebellum and plaques and whatever. But before we get into those kinds of details, I think that it's helpful to just take a step back and try to think about what these things actually mean. And so the moral of the story is absolutely that there are a lot of different directions being pursued right now. In some ways, it's the Wild West, where you don't know exactly what's important and who's doing what. But increasingly, over the last few years, key areas of research have shown exceptional promise and have attracted more and more research labs. Other things have shown that they're not quite as promising as we had thought that they might be. And then increasingly people being scientists are coming at this problem through different lenses. So from an immunotherapy lens, or from an inflammation lens, or from the lens of a particular part of the brain, or from a vaccine perspective, from lots of different kinds of ideas that are coming to fruition as people are trying to investigate this. But that's an exciting place to be. It's a vibrant place with a lot of different ideas. I'm going to focus, because I'm a board member with Lumind, I've seen the deliberations about trying to understand the space a bit and to understand which are some of the most promising things. So I'll focus on a few of those, but I want to also, and I'll have a slide on this in a second, highlight that there are a lot of things going on out there, and picking a few of these as the most promising is somewhat of a difficult process, but I'll do my best. So here, Lumind has provided a little over $15 million in funding over the last 10, 13 years, and I've tried to summarize them with cutesy little labels to give you a sense of what this actually might mean. Things like chilling out and speeding up, and growing something, and chemistry, and sleep, and too much plaque, and whatever. But please don't mistake these cutesy titles for representing the complexity of the ideas. They're just a way to get an overview sense of what's going on here. So first is this idea of excitation and inhibition in the hippocampus, or kind of a part of the brain that handles some learning and memory things. I've labeled that chill out or speed up, with the idea that there are some things that happen in the hippocampus that there's too much information going on, and there are other cases where there's too much inhibition going on. All of this due to overexpression of different things, or underexpression of different things associated with the extra copy of the 21st chromosome. And so 3 different labs, actually, Stanford, UCSD, Johns Hopkins, are looking at different ways of getting at this to inhibit things that should be inhibited a bit more, or excite things that it should be excited a bit more, and as a result, improve or help with learning and memory outcomes. The Roche trial was based on some of this work, and there are a lot of exciting things going on there. A second one is we're growing something here. We're trying to help in the growth factor. This has a very ridiculous name, which I like it when it's abbreviated SHH. I think that means Sonic Hedgehog compound, but somebody in a research lab surely had a good laugh about that one. But the idea here was that in the developing brain for people with Down syndrome, there's a growth compound that is that some neurons are not responding well to, and so some folks at Johns Hopkins have looked at an alternative compound that can help to overcome some of this. And again, the science here is not deep at the overview level, but there are great resources for learning more about the specifics here. And that's, I think, in the cerebellum. Next would be there's not enough chemistry. A key chemical in the brain, neuroepinephrine, that's involved with navigation and sensory information, is reduced in Down syndrome due to degeneration in a particular type of neuron or transmission structure. And so folks at UCSD and Palo Alto VA Hospital and health system have found 2 drugs that help to restore that neuroepinephrine level to more typical levels to help improve some of these functions of navigation and sensory perception. And so again, it's looking at a couple different drugs that can help to increase a chemical in the brain that is associated with some of these cognition functions. A next one would be sleep. And these are in no particular order. They're just some of the things that are exciting. A couple different labs, Arizona and at Stanford. These are when I talk about Stanford or Johns Hopkins or different ones, there are different researchers at each of these institutions doing different parts of this. But they're looking at sleep regulation, some things with sleep apnea, and the effects of some of those sleep challenges for people with Down syndrome on memory and learning and cognition after disrupted sleep patterns, and some things that can be done to help with that. Plaque, too much plaque. If you're familiar with the idea of what causes Alzheimer's, there's not crystal consensus in the literature about exactly what causes Alzheimer's, but there's increasing understanding that these amyloid plaques are an important part of what is going on there. And some of the work that's gone on Alzheimer's is showing real promise for people with Down syndrome, because the link between Down syndrome and Alzheimer's has been greatly, the understanding of that has been greatly improved over the last few years. And so there are a couple different labs that are looking at different parts of this to look at some things that can happen. In a few slides, I'll give you a sense of Dr. Mobley's take on how Down syndrome fits into that network. I do see promise, so some early stage compounds that are entering drug discovery. There are some things focused on neurotransmission, some things that are focused on imbalance excitation that are more of the early stage compounds that haven't been focused on as much, but are getting active research funding and focus to give you a sense of, that there are things at all stages of the pipeline. Some work on tools, so I need better tools. There are a couple different ones here, some things around array tomography, some high throughput screening mechanisms to look at specific structures and functions in the brain that we don't understand a lot about, because until a few years ago, we just didn't have any research on any of this stuff among people with Down syndrome. And so some of these tools that have been developed in other areas for other indications are being adapted for use in this population that can really help us to understand things in a deeper way. And then I call the last one LinkedIn. I'm in a business school, so LinkedIn's kind of a big deal around here. But the Down Syndrome Cognition Project does a couple different things, but linking together at least 10 different universities led by Dr. Sherman at Emory to study genetic variability within Down syndrome. So not just the extra copy of a chromosome, but actually variation within people that have Down syndrome and effects on cognition, and there are a lot of potential things that can come out of that collaboration that could be really valuable. And Dina, again, feel free to stop me at any point if there are questions that come up. But this is just a few of the things that Lumind has been focusing on over the last few years. But chilling out, speeding up processing in the brain, growing, helping with the growth factor of parts of the brain, dealing with chemical things that are going on in the brain where there's underexpression of a particular chemical. Well, what if we could help to improve that? What are the issues of sleep? How do we deal with some of these plaques that can occur in people with Down syndrome, even at earlier stages of life relative to the typical diagnosis age for people with Down syndrome or with Alzheimer's. Some work on tools, some links between universities. This is a slide that helps to show some of this, but it just kind of represents a little bit graphically what it means to maintain the health of some nerve cells, or to balance transmission within the brain, to look at differences in mice with cerebellums that have Down syndrome and that are treated to help to improve the growth factor of that part of the brain, and some things around the amyloid plaques and tangles for Alzheimer's, what we see in a control image versus in the Down syndrome population, even at early ages, and then for a fully expressed Alzheimer patient, and kind of how we can learn from each other about what's going on there to help the global plight with Alzheimer's, but also help people with Down syndrome to have opportunities as well. There are a couple other things that are going on. So the Global Down Syndrome Foundation, I'm a big fan of the work that they do. They focus a lot on the University of Colorado. They've provided almost $7 million to date to scientists pursuing a bunch of different directions. They use this Grand Challenges program as one of their mechanisms, and it's an outstanding program. They funded 33 different scientists looking at a range of different things, from immune systems to understanding why people with Down syndrome have fewer solid state cancers. Not less cancer overall, but maybe certain types, and what is it about the overexpression of genes on the 21st chromosome that that influences some of that. Some things around anti-inflammatory therapies, or people with Down syndrome's metabolic responses to different medicines or conditions. There's also work that's going on in other parts of science that could really have interesting things for Down syndrome. So there was a lot of news and press around a gene silencing approach that was published last summer, looking at epigenetic kind of techniques where if you can use these regulating mechanisms that modulate gene expression that kind of sit over top of the gene, maybe there are some things that can be done there. So in this particular one, there was this approach to gene silencing to turn off long parts of the chromosome. It's not clear what's going to happen with that, but that's at least something going on that could be potentially interesting. There's work with gene therapy. There's work with the CRISPR-Cas9 technologies of gene editing and trying to understand what that would mean for people with Down syndrome. There's great work on nutritional supplements and many other paths, things that are just not being pursued yet because there isn't funding for this. So at Lumind, we have taken some steps to try to get a sense of, well, what if we doubled our funding? What if we tripled our funding? What would be the next thing that we would pursue? And we keep a list of these kind of shovel-ready research projects, which are things that we could get off the ground pretty quickly if we had funding for them. And so there are literally millions and millions of dollars of these things that are potential things that could happen right now if we just had additional funding. And I don't want to sound like an evangelist in talking about that stuff. It's more to just give you a sense of the landscape. There are a lot of things going on by a lot of different people, and there's a whole set of things that are ready for funding that are just not being pursued right now because scientists have to keep their labs funded, and so they're pursuing other things because that's where the funding is. And so as we can help to address some of that, then we'll have some real opportunities. I love this quip from Dr. Mobley about one particular thing that we've talked about, which is the Alzheimer's connection with Down syndrome. And he has a great perspective, which is, we're going to solve Alzheimer's disease in Down syndrome first, and then we're going to solve it for everybody else. These are the kinds of positive externalities or kind of connections between what's happening in the Down syndrome research community and the broader scientific community that can be really mutually beneficial. And so there are really exciting things going on, especially in the Alzheimer's space, but across a lot of these different things that it's an exciting time. And I don't mean to come off too optimistic, because there are certainly setbacks and challenges, but this is a hopping place for research. So I can talk about all this research and talk about the exciting things, but if this is just research that's going to help chemical processes and not really impact people's lives, it's more of a scientific endeavor and less of something that we can get really excited about as family members of people with Down syndrome. And so I wanted to take a moment to stop and think, what are we actually working toward? Because when people get too specific with, well, we're going to improve IQ by X%, or we're going to create transformed independence or whatever, I feel like some of that is hopeful opportunity, and some of that is, I personally think, a little bit overly optimistic and overly precise. And so instead, maybe we can just talk about what are some realistic goals. And these are things that I think most people in the research community would say, if we're able to better handle transmission within the brain, or to increase the expression of some of these chemicals that are underexpressed, or help with some of the growth factors, or these other pieces of the puzzle that are being pursued, I think there's agreement that we could help people actually live more active and independent lives. What does independence mean? I don't know. There are a lot of people that are working on different parts of this. Some of this has nothing to do with research. So great things going on with the NDSS and DSAIA and others that are helping with vocational outcomes and whatever. But the research can help, and there are real opportunities for improving that. Another is to participate more successfully in school and employment. So what does that mean? I don't know, but it means that if you help to take some of these obstacles out of the way of these really talented people with Down syndrome, I think that they will have better opportunities to excel in environments where they are already doing okay, but could really use a little help. And then to avoid some of the additional cognitive decline associated with Alzheimer's disease and aging, we know that in people with Down syndrome, there's earlier onset of Alzheimer's disease and very wide incidence of this among people with Down syndrome as they age. And so if we can help with that, and there are some realistic pathways that we can imagine in 5, 10, 15 years making a really dramatic impact on this, that helps people with Down syndrome to have more control over their lives and have more opportunities. When I talk about this with some of the groups that I talk with on campus at Notre Dame or in our community here, sometimes this idea of a cure comes up, and I want to be really clear. Like, I don't think anybody here, I know for certain, no one is looking for a cure for Down syndrome. We love people with Down syndrome just as they are, but if we have opportunities to provide compounds, drugs, therapies that can help people with Down syndrome to have life a little bit easier, or to have a bit more independence, or control over their own destiny, or some of these better outcomes, or wider opportunities with school and employment, if we can, that's something that we can really champion and get excited about. Just as I would have no problem offering my daughter Sophia eyeglasses to help her see better. And I realize there are differences between treating people with compounds that influence the way that they remember and learn versus giving someone a pair of eyeglasses. But the analogy is one that I think has traction, because that's what the goal is here, is not to change people, but to give them opportunities. And so what does that look like? Does it mean gaining skills faster, earlier in development, improving communication, problem solving and retention, or becoming more independent in school and at work? In mouse models, we can't directly translate exactly what's going on here, but the mouse models are moving toward clinical trials. We have a variety of different compounds that are in clinical trials, and those are realistic outcomes that we are assessing, that people who are pursuing this research are looking at these kinds of outcomes associated with learning, associated with memory, associated with understanding information in an environment that have direct implications for these kinds of skill development, communication, problem solving, and independence outcomes. And so I think this is a realistic assessment of what's possible. So transitioning toward my specific path and how I went from somebody who knew nothing about Down syndrome. There was one person in my grade school that had Down syndrome that I knew his sister a little bit. and that was probably the extent of my knowledge of Down syndrome, to being someone who's a champion for this. Graphically here is kind of represented in Sophia is born, or we get the prenatal diagnosis, and then Sophia Jane Manor is born, and I learn as much as I can. We get involved with our local affiliate in South Bend, Indiana, which is Michiana Down Syndrome, a fantastic organization of people just like all of you. And then I became involved with RDS and Lumind, DSRTF, as it's kind of transformed over the years, to be a little bit more vocal in trying to help to promote this research. So just to quickly step through some of this, 2007, we received a prenatal diagnosis in the fall about our second child was going to have Down syndrome. And then associated with that, what actually drove it was the identification of a VSD, or ventricular septal defect, that led us to a specialist, a neonatal specialist, that helped us to get the full diagnosis. And I spent the next few weeks learning absolutely everything I could about Down syndrome. And in the process of learning that, I saw a little bit about research, but there really wasn't a whole lot, especially for the general public, about this. But, you know, that was the beginning. In 2008, March 1st, 2008, Sophia was born in Lansing, where I was going to school at Michigan State. She was healthy, but she was not thriving. Her oxygen levels were not great. She was having trouble eating, but she was beautiful and looked just like my wife, and was just a wonderful blessing. Her brother adored her. The family was super excited and supportive, and so we thought we were going to come home from the hospital and then maybe at 6 months have a heart surgery, but because she wasn't thriving, we ended up staying in the hospital and getting transferred to University of Michigan Hospital from Lansing to do the VSD surgery. She did exceptionally well, came home less than a week later, and then a couple months after that we moved to South Bend so I could start my new job at Notre Dame. And since then, we joke, we have 5 kids now. Sophia's been our easiest child in many ways. She is just a wonderfully loving person, and is not quite as prone to some of the outbursts that some of our other kids are, that we're working through. But she's been doing great. We've had checkups every year since then. She's now 9 years old. Just had a birthday a couple days ago. We had a big birthday party. But she's doing great. After we moved to South Bend, we got right involved with our local affiliate, which is Michiana Down Syndrome. Went to our first buddy walk, started meeting families, doing advocacy, and all the great things that local affiliates help with. So getting connected with community resources, those sorts of things. Along that, in the first couple of years, I saw a flyer by that was advertising a talk by Pat Flatley, a great founding sponsor of a lot of this research. And she was giving a talk at Notre Dame, so I showed up. She knew nothing about me. I sat quietly, listened to what she had to say, and got really excited. And then reached out to her, started to get to know some of the people, and trying to figure out, you know, how to navigate this. At some point, I decided to try to do a fundraiser, because that was the big question. And I converted two other Down syndrome dads that I didn't know very well, but I liked them some at some of our events, and convinced them that we should try to raise some money. 2012, we had our first Night of Art and Blues, which was just, we didn't go in intending to create a blues event, but we did some looking around and decided that this would be a good way to do it. I hoped that we just wouldn't lose money, and in fact, we brought in a bunch of money, and then, you know, fast forward 5 years later, we brought in over $200,000 in revenue for research. Our net to the cause is a little bit less than that, but for some people that knew nothing about this to go to this point, just gives you a sense of how accessible this is. So, giving you that kind of background, next I want to talk to you about kind of how I looked at the problem. And if there are questions, please, you know, let me know. I see some solicitation here going for questions, but don't be shy. So some things that I came to as I was trying to learn as much as I could was, one, how do we ramp up this research? As I started to learn about what Pat Flatley and Dan Flatley and some of the others were talking about, it's like, okay, this is pretty exciting stuff. There's real potential here, published in Science and Nature and done by some of the leading scientists out there. So how do we ramp it up? And big surprise, it turns out that money is really key. Research that gets funded gets conducted, and researchers need funding to power their labs. They're not being obstinate about this. It's just that when you don't have money to fund your lab, or you have to go to sources that will kind of help to keep your postdoctoral researchers and your associates and doctoral students and everybody else that's involved in this science employed. And so that means follow the money. And so I did my best to try to follow the money. I teach MBAs here, and this is some of the stuff that I teach them about. It's like, okay, you've identified a problem, do some analysis. You know, what are the sources here? What are the root cause analysis? You know, what can we learn about the drivers of this? And so it turns out that for research, most of the money comes from three sources: government funding, pharmaceutical funding, and private foundation funding. What's important to know here is that the model of funding that has worked for Down syndrome in the past to help with advocacy and education and access to medicine and all the things that the Down syndrome community has excelled in doing over the last 20, 30 years, that model doesn't work for research. And that's because the kind of fundraising that you need to power research at the top research labs is millions and millions of dollars. And so this idea of relying on money that comes from families of people with Down syndrome just doesn't work. It's just not a feasible business model. And so that's why we need to focus on government funding and pharmaceutical funding and private foundation funding. And in fact, when we created our Night of Art and Blues fundraiser, only a few families of people with Down syndrome are regular attendees. Really, we're focused on the broader community of trying to find people who have discretionary money that can get excited about what's going on with Down syndrome and have empathy and understanding and are interested in really making a difference. And those are the people we target. And people with family members that have Down syndrome are big supporters, but they're not the central sources of our funding. So anyway, stepping through these, government funding. Many of you know Kathy McMorris Rogers has helped create this caucus of legislators that are supporting this, and so there are more than 50 members of this. There's a Kennedy, people from across the country. They've done a lot to try to help with things like the ABLE Act and some of the other things that have come through in the last few years, and they've cheerfully supported increases in funding. But the reality is this slide, which is for the National Institute of Health, the big funding agency for this. The NIH is providing a lot of money for Down syndrome research, you know, millions and millions of dollars. But relative to some of the other conditions, on a proportionate basis, it's much more meager. And so that creates an opportunity for people like us to cheerfully support our congressional representatives and to encourage them to be part of this and to support this. A second area that we've had increasing success with is getting big pharma interested in this. This is not an orphan drug, so it's a big enough population that this doesn't qualify for some of the fast-track things for drugs that are not economically viable for pharmaceutical companies to pursue. We're close to it, but not quite there. And so as a result, we need to get pharmaceutical and biotech interested in this. And so there's been a lot of work that's gone into this by the scientists, by private foundations, by people like you and I. And September 9th, 2011, landmark for Down syndrome, when Roche announced the first ever trial into the safety and efficacy of a drug focused on cognition and Down syndrome. Since then, there have been 4. And there are a number of others that are in the wings and possible. So this is on a path of progress. There have been real setbacks, some things that are pretty frustrating, but this is the way progress works. And so we're making progress. The last and possibly most important part of this are private foundations. And so these are a few of the private foundations. This is not an inclusive list. There are some others as well that are trying to fund research. But private foundations play a huge role in driving the agenda and the excitement and the enthusiasm for research. The MS Society is a great example of what's possible. They went from almost zero fundraising in the 70s and 80s to they have crossed, or they're getting really close to $1 billion in funding of research over the last 30 years as they've professionalized and really focused on raising research dollars to address this. And now folks with MS have 10 approved drug treatments, 5 phase 3 drugs in the pipeline, 7 in phase 2, more in phase 1, 3 with fast track status. And so this is a model that we can look to and see what's possible. Right now we're a very small fraction of what the MS Society has been able to do, and yet they have a similar prevalence in the United States as Down syndrome does. And so this is not about stealing money from MS or from cancer research or anywhere else, but rather to give a sense of what's possible if we can really push this forward. And so momentum's picking up, but these foundations need energy and enthusiasm and people to take the next step to try to make this happen. And so this is another demonstration of this, which is from the non-government sources of funding. We're really small on a per diagnosed person basis of how much the private foundations have been able to generate. And if you were to go 10 years ago or 7 years ago, that number would have been a fraction of even what it is now. We're on a great trajectory, but we need more of this to complement and encourage the NIH and other government agencies in different parts of the world, and then Big Pharma to really take this on. So how can you meaningfully drive this? Again, questions at any point. We're almost wrapping up here. So I totally understand people have lives and need to get back to their lives, but if you do have questions, please let me know or send them in, and we'll get to them. But how can you meaningfully support research? This is a picture on the one side here of our event from a week ago, 2 weeks ago. That was a picture at the Brick where we hold our event, and we brought in a bunch of money, and it was great fun. We've kind of figured out the recipe for it, and it's working great. The other one is a picture of a golf event. So Hayes Mechanical is a fantastic supporter organization with a leader that is passionate about Down syndrome research, and he and many others organize golf events that have been hugely successful in bringing in money. So one way that you can meaningfully support research is to start a fundraiser. And this sounds daunting, but it's much easier than you think. We can help you with a startup kit to get you a lot of the pieces that you would need to just kind of plug and play to get this going. You can do that for a cocktail fundraiser, for a golf event, for some art-oriented themes, and some of the other things that you might be interested in. What we've found is that it ends up being a lot of fun because, you know, like our group, we meet at a bar to, after our kids go to bed, to plan for this. We do it for a couple months, and then we have a good event, and then we wrap it up for the year. But planned well, this doesn't have to conflict with affiliate fundraising, and we've done a really good job of working with Michiana Down Syndrome to program carefully so that we reach different audiences and don't inhibit the great things that Michiana Down Syndrome is doing. Another way that you can connect is through the DS Connect registry for people who have a family member with Down syndrome to get connected. I know many of you are already connected with this. The website is actually down right now, but we're told it'll be up in the next few weeks. But this is a way for you to get connected into the community and make research more efficient for researchers who are interested in studying different parts of this. It's a passive way to do it, but it's really important. And although we have hundreds of thousands of people in the United States with Down syndrome, there are like a couple thousand people on the DS Connect registry. This is an easy thing to do. It takes a few minutes, and it's something that everyone can do to really help research without putting a lot of sweat or blood or tears into. Another one that is another passive way that accumulates is workplace giving programs. There are a number of different organizations that can do this, and if you're already doing this to support your local affiliate, awesome. If you aren't, matching programs add up to a lot of dollars. Another one is that the Lumind organization has a great runners program. You can run a race anywhere. You can come get involved in some of the big races that we help to buy some or to organize bibs for. But whatever, these are great ways for you to maybe commingle some of your hobbies with ways to raise money. And then a big part, and a lot of affiliates are already doing this, but if your local group isn't doing this, it makes a lot of sense for affiliate organizations, local advocacy organizations, to look for ways to provide a part of their revenue each year toward research. And so what that exactly looks like, that could be different in different markets, and maybe it's not right for your local area, but there are certainly possibilities. Related to this, I tend to think that dads are an underutilized asset for fundraising, so I've created a secret formula that can help you to overcome this. Mathematically, this can be represented this way, which is you take dads, random dads doing lots of important things, helping their families, add Buffalo Wild Wings, which is where we meet for our meetings, and voila, you get golf events, piles of money, cocktail events, great things for research. This is the way to kind of think about this differently. It doesn't have to be just writing a big check. Big checks really help. Connecting us with corporate sponsors, great, but this is a way that you can really move the needle. For us, again, none of us had any fundraising experience. We all have full-time jobs. We have 11 kids between the 3 dads that organize this, but we hold our meetings once a week, a little less than that, 'cause, when it overlaps with Christmas and that sort of thing, we take a few weeks off. We do these meetings after our kids go to bed. We start a few months before the event, and we get people to help us. And most people don't come to the meetings. They just help by getting us a silent auction item or connecting us with a sponsor or whatever, but it's worked out great. So I would encourage you to just mull on it, to just think about different ways that you can connect. And if this is something that's good for you across any of these mechanisms, they're really easy ways to get connected. So I'll stop there. This is the three gentlemen in the picture there are Rob Kelly, I'm in the middle, and then Tom Henry, and our wives, again, a few days ago at our event. And it's fun. It's a great way to get together with some friends. We sometimes call it a dad support group because we spend most of our time talking about our jobs and the other things, our hobbies and whatever, but we get the job done. So with that, any questions? I think we have a minute or two for your questions. But thanks again for being part of this.
Great. Okay, we do have some.
Okay.
I'm getting a bit of an echo there. I'm sorry. And this is kind of a funding question. Any info on funding for general Alzheimer and how the Down syndrome community can partner with the general Alzheimer research? I think that's what I should probably put in there.
Yeah, so that's been a big part of it, and some of the most promising things that are going on right now are using the Down syndrome population as a way to look at things that are being pursued in the broader Alzheimer's community. And so there are some great organizations that raise money for Alzheimer's. We're looking for ways to work with them to do joint events and to kind of be part of this because it's in both parties' interest to kind of work toward that. So I would say there are some things going on in that direction, but if there are local organizations that you know that are doing some of this, there are always opportunities to strengthen those relationships. And if you want to connect with me or others to help make that happen, that's great. If you want to do it on your own or through your local affiliate organization, that's great too.
Great. And I'm going to answer a quick question. The slides, if I wish you would download them now, but we will try to make them available in a follow-up email. But of course, the recording will be available. All right, so another question. Any timeline on these treatments to improve cognitive functions being approved? Are there too many variables, funding, etc., to really give an estimate?
I'm optimistic. So I'm relatively deeply involved in seeing the grants that are coming through and looking across organizations. It would be naive for me to say that 3 years from now or 7 years from now, we're going to have a marketable drug on the market. But is it possible that 5 to 10 years from now, we have actual approved drugs that have shown real efficacy? Absolutely. I think that a lot of this is gaining momentum, and especially if you think about the diversity of things that are going on right now, the average fail rate for an FDA trial is like 9% succeed, something like that, and that's a global number. And so it's very important to have a diversity of different approaches that are being pursued, and that's one of the most exciting things about Down syndrome is that we have a wide range of targets, wide range of approaches, and across those, I think that we have real promise in I don't know. It's naive for me to say 7 years from now or 6 years from now, but in that time horizon, I think that there could be some real good things happening.
All right. So, one more question. How can families of individuals with Down syndrome help influence the government, corporate, and foundation funding?
I've found that when we try to do this with cold calls, it's useless and generally ineffective. So the best way I've found, and again, this is just one guy's perspective, is to talk to people that you know that are involved with organizations that do this sort of stuff. So if it's corporations, so we have a great sponsor in Whirlpool that does great things for our organization. That really came from my friend Tony, who I didn't even realize worked at Whirlpool, but we got him excited about this. He doesn't have a child with Down syndrome, but he got excited about kind of being part of all this, and now all of a sudden Whirlpool is doing great things for us. Same thing across different kinds of organizations. Talk to people you know, and see if they can help you think through these problems. For congressional members, spend some time with them. Any congressional member will have the responsibility to meet with constituents and just talk to them, get around them. If you know people that know them well, so Joe Donnelly is a senator from Indiana. He's from our town here. He came to one of our events. He is not out there championing this research, but he knows a lot more about it because we've been kind of working him. So that would be my take.
Great. One more quick question, and then we're going to wrap it up. And it's very fundraising oriented. So, do you need to develop a 501c3, or do you run the money through your local affiliate?
So there are lots of different ways. I found that it was much too much of a hassle to create a separate organization to do this, and so Lumind, very generously, like probably many other organizations, will happily backstop events. So we accumulate expenses, Lumind pays those expenses, and then all revenues go straight to Lumind. So no money is going into Mike Manner's checking account. We don't have a separate 501c3. And in this case, we don't even work with the local affiliate, although the local affiliate is incredibly helpful and supportive. We don't mix funds. This just goes straight there. There are lots of arrangements to make this, again, as easy as possible. I don't want to be overly simplified, but really, we can make this a lot easier than you think.
Great. I think we're going to stop it there and really appreciate the information today, Mike. The presentation was fantastic. Thank you again to Lumind for sponsoring the webinar and for bringing the speaker in. And any last thoughts that you have for the attendees today, Mike?
I'm just very thankful for you spending an hour of your time thinking about this. I know you're all great supporters already, but thank you. Really appreciate it.